Hello everyone, this is Jason from Primetime Aquatics, and today's video is an important one. We're going to be talking about 5 signs that your fish may not be getting enough oxygen, which is one of the most important aspects of your freshwater ecosystem. So we're going to be talking about what can cause a lack of oxygen, the signs, the way you notice it, and of course, what to do about it. Thanks for being here. Hope you enjoyed the video. I think potential cause number 1 is just a lack of surface agitation. We have to have water moving at the top of the aquarium, especially if you've got a heavily stocked tank. Otherwise, you're just not going to have enough gas exchange. At the surface of your aquarium, we've got oxygen coming into the water and we have CO2 leaving the water. And if the surface agitation isn't adequate enough to get those gases exchanged, your fish may suffer. Now, if you have a very lightly stocked tank, it might not be as important, but for people who have an average stocked tank to a heavily stocked tank, surface agitation is everything. A lot of people think if you add air stones and if you add sponge filters, those bubbles are supplying oxygen to your water. They're actually not. Most of the time what they're doing is they're breaking at the surface. They're actually releasing the oxygen, but there's enough surface agitation there where you're getting really good gas exchange. And so take a look at your aquarium. Do you have some type of an air stone or a sponge filter or a hang-on back filter, internal, external canister filter that's getting a lot of water movement at the top? Now, we've done a video on how much water flow your fish actually need. I'll put that video in the upper right-hand corner as well as in the description below if you want to learn more. Next thing to consider is the stocking level of your aquarium. If you've got a heavily stocked tank, there's going to be a lot more demand for oxygen. And so we got to be really careful here. If you're keeping cichlids like Mbuna or peacock cichlids, or you've got a guppy breeding tank that has just gone absolutely crazy, just make sure you have enough water movement at the top of that tank, because if you've got a very heavily stocked tank, that's going to create a lot of demand for oxygen. Another thing to consider is if you've got dead fish or dead plants in the aquarium, that's going to start releasing a lot of organic compounds. You might wind up with a bacterial bloom. A lot of times the bacteria are aerobic, which means that they need oxygen. And so now they start competing with the fish in your aquarium for the oxygen that is available, because they're trying to break down the fish or the plant material that is no longer living. And so if you start to see a problem with your fish that we're going to talk about here, the signs, well, make sure you don't have anything that is decaying in your aquarium. Another thing to consider is, did you add a lot of botanicals to your aquarium? Things like driftwood, catappa leaves, cassia cones. If you have a lot of organics, sometimes those things can release from the botanicals, and that can help deplete oxygen for a period of time. A really good example of that, we were at Aquashella. I added a bunch of grapevine to an aquarium that I was aquascaping, didn't realize it was going to release so many organic compounds into the water over such a short period of time. And we had a very rough weekend of trying to make sure that the aquarium was not super cloudy and wasn't lacking in oxygen. The next one is a huge one, and it might actually be the #1 contributor to a lack of oxygen in the aquarium. And really, it's not so much a lack of oxygen, it's the fact that the fish can't get to the oxygen, and that is, do you have an uncycled aquarium? Do you have a brand new aquarium with no beneficial bacteria? You didn't add things like, well, this stuff here, live nitrifying bacteria, Fritzzyme 7. Fritz is a channel sponsor. They are awesome. One of the reasons why is because they have this. It's the best live nitrifying bacteria on the market. If you don't have it, there will be an affiliate link down in the description below for you. Really important when you're setting up a new tank, if you don't have cycled filter media, to add live nitrifying bacteria to your aquarium. Why? Because fish produce ammonia, and there are microbes like what you find in this Fritzzyme 7 that will break the ammonia down to nitrite, and then other microbes that will break the nitrite down to nitrate. Ammonia and nitrite are very toxic to fish. They attack the gill tissue, and it makes it really hard for them to obtain oxygen. So make sure you have a cycled aquarium before you put fish in the fish tank. If you want to learn more about how to cycle an aquarium and what that means, please check out that video in the upper right-hand corner as well as in the description below. It's one of the most important things you can learn about fish keeping. This next one is really big and really common too. Does your fish have a parasite? Again, if you've got newer fish and they start to develop white spots, that could be ick. Ick, again, attacks the gill tissue, makes it very hard for fish to get oxygen that they need. And so if you wind up with an ick infestation, you've got white spots everywhere. I'll put that video in the upper right-hand corner as well as in the description below as well. But that has to get treated. It's not going away on its own. It will be 100% fatal to fish if left untreated. One other thing to consider is if you add too many chemical additives to your aquarium. What I mean by that is some of the dechlorinators, if they are too concentrated and you put too much in an aquarium, that can deplete oxygen. If you're treating fish for disease, especially a formalin-based treatment, that will also deplete the oxygen in the aquarium. All right, so obviously, now that we know what causes it, how will you know if your fish are lacking oxygen? I think one of the number one things is if you see a lot of your fish at the top of your aquarium at the surface and they're doing what is known as piping, where they just look like they're sucking air at the top of the aquarium and they're just swimming around the top only, especially for fish that would normally not be found at the top. That is an absolute sign that there is an oxygen problem, whether that is a water quality issue, whether that is a surface agitation issue, a parasitic issue. There is absolutely something going on there. So if you see fish that are piping at the top, they look like they're just sucking air at the surface of your aquarium, please, you need to start doing some investigation. We're going to talk about that in a minute, what to do, but that is an absolute problem. Second thing to consider is if you start to see white spots appearing on your fish. We talked about it previously. If you see that, again, that is not something that we can wait on. You need to treat that immediately. That's why that video is down in the description. So if you've got white spots on your fish, we have to take care of that. Another thing to look for is if you have fish or invertebrates like snails that are usually going to be attached to surfaces, and you see them all at the very, very surface of your aquarium. So your plecos and your snails are just stuck to the glass and they're right at the surface and they won't move. That's telling you something. Usually that means they're having a hard time obtaining oxygen. Now, it could be for any one of the reasons that we've already talked about. Could be a parasite, it could be surface agitation, overstocked, but you want to pay attention to that because they're one of the first organisms in your tank that's going to tell you, hey, something might be a little bit off in my fish tank. Also, look for fish that are rapidly breathing. When the fish is in a relaxed state, most fish, their gills are not moving in and out at a very, very high rate unless they've been swimming around the tank really fast or chasing other fish or something like that. But normally, the gills are not supposed to be going in and out really, really fast. So respiration rate, if they're just constantly sucking in water and trying to get oxygen, that might be an indication of some oxygen stress. Another sign to look for is if you have cory cats or loaches in the aquarium and they are constantly going from the bottom and shooting up to the top to get air and coming back down. These fish will do that occasionally. But if they're doing that repeatedly and you see their gills are moving rapidly, that is usually a sign that there's something wrong, usually with your water parameters, but certainly there is an oxygen deprivation issue going on there. And one of the last things to look for is if the fish have red or inflamed gills. That usually means that there is a problem obtaining oxygen. And again, that can be due to any kind. It could be due to a parasite. It could be due to water parameters. So now that we know what causes it, we know what to look for. We got to fix the situation, right? So first thing, one of the things that we talked about at length when I did my Master's Cert in Aquaculture and Fish Health is test the water. Do not assume that your water is okay. Things sometimes go wrong, even if you've had a stable ecosystem for a while. We use this Fritz test kit. It's a liquid test kit. I like them quite a bit. It's going to give you the information, especially when it comes to problems with oxygen availability, and that is ammonia and especially nitrite. Those two are one of the main culprits if there is a water quality issue. Again, I will put that Amazon affiliate link down in the description below, but that is a really important thing. If you're keeping fish and you don't have a water test kit, you really, really need one. So definitely look into that. But test your water. Make sure your ammonia is at 0 and your nitrite is at 0, and your nitrates, although it doesn't contribute to oxygen availability quite as much, you still want to keep that at 20 parts per million or less if you can. Next thing, observe your fish. Make sure they don't have any obvious parasites, especially as it pertains to oxygen availability. There's no white spots on their bodies. This is why you should be quarantining your fish. If you don't quarantine your fish, you are asking for problems. I've done a video, I put that in the upper right-hand corner as well as in the description below, of exactly how we quarantine our fish, and we bring in lots of fish every single month, thousands of fish, and we quarantine them for 4 weeks because we don't want any issues for people who are buying our fish, and we certainly don't want any issues when we're adding them to our own display tanks like you see behind me here. So observe your fish, make sure that they don't have any obvious signs of external parasites. Next thing is make sure you've got adequate surface agitation. And so is your hang-on back filters are your sponge filters, your air stones. You can always add an air stone or two if you think you have a potential issue there with surface agitation. It can sometimes be a downside for both internal and external canister filters because those returns are a little bit lower than the surface. It does move the surface water, and normally that is more than sufficient. So if you've got an external or internal canister filter and you're not having any issues, don't change anything. But if you are having oxygen availability issues and you see your fish are stressed out, please look into possibly adding an air stone or two, but most of the time that is not necessary. Again, check around your aquarium. Make sure that there are no dead fish stuck behind a rock or in a cave or stuck in some kind of piece of driftwood, that your plants haven't decayed, you don't have dead leaf litter all over the place. Remove that stuff because it's just decaying, and now you've got an increase in aerobic bacteria that are breaking that down, and those microbes are now competing with your fish, your snails, your shrimp for oxygen. Next thing, don't be afraid to do water changes, and don't be afraid to do big water changes. 75, 80% is perfectly acceptable, especially if you are having issues and you suspect that it is a water quality issue. When you have an ammonia or nitrite spike, do the 75 or 80% water change. A 20 to 30% water change does next to nothing. If you've got a parasitic infection in there, make sure that you're treating it properly. Sometimes municipalities will put chemicals in their water in the water treatment process, and that will spike for a day or two, and the next thing you know, your fish are having problems after a water change. But don't be afraid to do another one to try to get some of that stuff flushed out. So water changes, really, really important. When I had that problem with the grapevine at Aquashella, I had to do 3 90% water changes on a Saturday, and I came in on a Sunday morning before the show opened and did another 75% water change, and that really, really helped. So don't be afraid to do those big water changes. So now we know what to look for and what to do if our fish are not getting adequate oxygen. If you want to learn more about the nitrogen cycle, it is extremely important. Check out that video in the upper right hand corner. If you want to learn more about how much water flow your fish need, check out the video lower right hand corner. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you in the next one.